So I want to review the controversial episode of the Boondocks, the story of Jimmy Rebel. And for those who don't know, that Jimmy Rebel is a musician that was very popular down south, and he was very very controversial because he used a lot of racial slurs in his music, and he was definitely very anti-black in his music. But he was very very popular in the South, and he had a legacy, I believe. I think they said he retired in the 2000s. So it's kind of just crazy how he remained very very popular for many many decades after like racism became taboo. And this is sort of like a fantasy episode of what would happen if you took his character and he had a relationship with Uncle Ruckus as friends. And I think that that's actually kind of really really interesting as well. And I would say that the positive thing about this episode is two things. That number one, this is an episode about friendship, and it kind of shows like how deep the friendship between Ruckus and Robert is, because Robert is there for him to the very end. And then also just how Jimmy Rebel is willing to risk his career because working with an American person is is something that's career suicide for him. But he's willing to say, you know what, I want, it's more about what I want versus money and fame. And then the last thing is that this is a great episode about freedom of speech. That I think what a lot of young people may not realize is that with political incorrect comedy like this, like another great example is Clayton Bigsby from the Chappelle Show, and then also Cartoon Wars, the episode, the four episodes of South Park where you know, the episode of South Park where they want to stop Family Guy from airing Muhammad, and the second part of that, and then also that I think it was Tom Cruise or another character who wants to turn into Muhammad, so that way he doesn't be made fun of. So the point of all that is that these politically incorrect comedies, the basis of all of them is freedom of speech, meaning that it doesn't matter how controversial it is, it doesn't matter how politically incorrect it is, we can all laugh at it because it's funny. And then I think, like, if I have it correctly, in the 1960s there was something called the Hays Code, and that started in the 1920s all the way to the 1960s. Which meant that, you know, there were certain rules and regulations that you had in the movie. No excessive sex, no excessive violence. That if you have a female character that's a villain, she had to be punished or die at the end of the movie. If there was a black character that committed a crime, he would have to die or be punished by the end of the film. I think another rule was that only women can smoke cigarettes if they're villains. So what happened between the late 60s all the way up into the 2010s was really that politically incorrect humor also became a very popular medium. But nowadays it's extremely taboo to do politically incorrect humor. And like I always say, that, you know, it's really watching old television episodes that, you know, you can kind of see all that stuff. Like you can watch All in the Family in the 70s, you can watch obviously the Boondocks and obviously South Park, you know, but nowadays it's really what I call the South Park pass. Only South Park can really get away with politically incorrect humor on a wide scale, but everybody else, it's kind of like you do that, you get canceled. And that's not good, because we should all have freedom of speech, and we shouldn't just like force people to have massively hate on something if it's satirical of racism like South Park. But also it is a form of comedy. But I would also kind of would say that that's kind of like the key points of this episode. It doesn't matter if anybody finds this offensive. It is a comedy about the absurdity of racism. So I'm going to get into this episode. That the first part of the episode is that, you know, you see the origin of Jimmy Rebel. You get an introduction of who he is. So he just like is a country singer. He uses the N word a lot in his music, and that's very popular down south. And I think the main theme of his work is that his ideology is that black people are just lazy and they complain all day about disadvantages, which I disagree with. You know, And then also too that, you know, later on you kind of see Uncle Ruckus is a fan of his music, so Uncle Ruckus writes lyrics, And then the first part of the episode is really Uncle Ruckus saying to Jimmy Rebel that he's not Uncle Ruckus. He's actually Uncle Ruckus's servant. And he has Granddad towards the end of this part pretend to be a white Uncle Ruckus off camera. And then Granddad says, no, I'm not playing along. Then Uncle Ruckus says to Jimmy Rebel that he's actually Uncle Ruckus, and the whole story that Uncle Ruckus is actually a white person was all made up. So one thing you're seeing is how deep Robert and Uncle Ruckus's relationship is, because obviously if Uncle Ruckus is going to be open racist against black people, and everybody in the Freeman family are going to tolerate him and still invite him to dinner and other things like that, it kind of says something about their level of patience with him, even though he's racist against them. And then the other thing it says is that for Granddad to go along with pretending to be a white Uncle Ruckus, it says about his level of friendship to Ruckus to be like, you know what, even though this is against my values, I'm still going to help you out because we're friends. There's a level inside both of them that they are friends with each other. So the next thing is that Jimmy Rebel realizes the situation. He's like, okay, well, Ruckus, we had a good day at the park. We hung out together. We kind of get along. I still want to work with you because we create good music together. I think that it also shows a level of two things. It shows a level of friendship between Jimmy Rebel, like saying that sometimes you should be forgiving of your friends, or sometimes you should be understanding that sometimes people are afraid of, are kind of afraid of your own opinion, so they're going to lie to you. And sometimes good friends are like, okay, it's not right, but I am understanding of that. And then the other issue is also what they call a favorite Jew or a favorite Negro syndrome, which means that, there's a racist and they say like, okay, well, I have a favorite black person. That means they're racist against all black people, but there may be one or two black people that they actually like and respect. And then favorite Jew, and I had a Jewish counselor when I was in counseling, and he did say that's something Adolf Hitler came up with, because I think like the story about Adolf Hitler is that his nurse was Jewish, that when he grew up with a doctor or a nurse that saved his life, and he grew up with another person that actually was Jewish that saved his life from drowning, and then actually there was another like Jewish person that saved him from illness as a child and saved his mother from illness. So he used the term favorite Jew, meaning that while he was very anti-Jewish, he believed that there are only like a few good Jewish people in the world, and that's true about a lot of races, but that's also the point of hypocrisy. If you're gonna be anti-Semitic and you say there's only a few good Jewish people, you're definitely contradicting yourself, or if you're friends with that person, you're contradicting yourself. And then also too, it's like, why would you be friends with a person that has those types of values? So I think that it's it kind of makes Jimmy Rebel look like a hypocrite, and I think that a lot of people call him out for that. Like even the record labels, they call him out for that. And one side note is that when you go down to when they show a clip of the city that Jimmy Rebel lives in, you are actually seeing Confederate flag statues, and you're also seeing Robert E. Lee Highway, and there's a lot of uses of the Confederate flag here. So I kind of like that because it's kind of showing like how back, just even like 10 years ago, the uses of the Confederate flag, or saying Robert E. Lee Highway, it would go over most people's heads, or even like more up north, people would talk about how that's offensive and it's celebrating, people who fought against the U.S. So, and then also the Confederate flag controversy and all that. So I think that it's also showing like how it's great that people are very, very reactive of that. That that the idea we need to change, and then but then how it was like 10 years ago before people had that ideology. The next thing that I would kind of say is that when they record music together, it's kind of very heavy because it's almost like every other word they're using the N word or saying jigaboo and coon and other like slurs for black people. So I think that, while you're listening, it is hilarious because obviously Uncle Ruck is a black man using black slurs and all that. It's hypocritical. And I would also say too that I think that when you watch this episode, it's very reminiscent of the Clayton Bigsby skit on the Chappelle Show, like where Dave Chappelle played the black white supremacist. So I think that this episode again is kind of like doing a homage to the Chappelle Show, because I think one of the ideas of the Chappelle Show in that skit was ultimately how racial slurs, like, because there are black people who use the word nigger and nigga for their friends, how nigger and nigga have kind of become very casual words or fun words to say. So when you see Uncle Ruckus use those words and Jimmy Rebel use those words, it's kind of like, comical, because it's almost like a wise person would say that you should not be talking like that. Like, honestly, that's so taboo and all that. I think and the next thing that I would say about all that is that, like towards the end of the episode, he sings a song like, Jimmy Rebel sings a song, One Good Nigger, and it's kind of about his friendship with Uncle Ruckus. Uncle Ruckus goes on stage at the event, and then it starts a fight and everything like that. So I think that it kind of is also reminiscent of Clayton Bigsby from the Chappelle Show, when Dave Chappelle takes off the Klan hood, and everybody realizes that the Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan is Clayton Bigsby, a black man. So it kind of like, again, shows how, I think, as they say, that, it's really hard to hate everybody, because there may be one or two people of a race that you hate that you actually love and enjoy. So, it's crazy, and then really the episode ends with them kind of singing together. And I think that, it's a very interesting episode. I do think that rightfully so, it's banned on HBO and a lot of other platforms that show the Boondocks episodes. And I do think that, I do not like that it's banned, but I do understand, like, how anybody who watches that would be, like, kind of blown away with how offensive that is. Like, honestly, they should show a disclaimer and just say, like, this is just politically incorrect humor, but still be able to watch the episode. You can watch the episode on YouTube. But I also think that, I do like that tie-in with a controversial figure. And even though, like, this is, like, the third season, a drop in quality, I do think that this is a good Boondocks episode, because obviously Uncle Ruckus is gratuitously racist. So I do not watch this episode and think of the F word, which is flanderization. It's not flanderizing Uncle Ruckus at all. And I also think that it really shows very clearly the hypocrisy of a racist. Like, how is Uncle Ruckus a African American white supremacist friends with Robert Freeman and the Freeman family, and asking him for such a big favor? And then how is Jimmy Rebel a person who's made a lot of money off of racism and anti-Afro and having anti-Afro beliefs, still being friends with an African-American white supremacist? When it comes to African-American, you should just be like, even if it's racist or not, you shouldn't be friends with me. So I think that, maybe one of the other optimistic messages is that, even if you're a racist, just like in American History X, you can make friends with people of a race that you have a hatred for, and then hopefully you learn from movies like American History X that it should motivate you to open your mind and be like, what, I was wrong all along. There's actually good people, we have good conversations, and I should just change my beliefs. But I also will say that another thing that I like and I think is important about this episode is it doesn't matter if somebody's saying something racist, and it doesn't matter if somebody's making racist satire, or it doesn't matter if somebody's making politically incorrect humor. Like, we have freedom of speech in this country. We should all just be allowed to say whatever we want. Obviously, I would say there should be prices to pay. Like, obviously, if the First Amendment says, I think there was a case called Skokie in the 1970s or 80s about Nazis marching. And again, freedom of speech, you should be allowed to march. But I would say that when a racist takes advantage of freedom of speech, you need to protest with counter racism. And that's the same thing with this episode. If you don't like this episode, do videos about it and talk about why don't you like it, and why maybe Magruder and the people writing the Boondocks were wrong to create this. That's the right thing to do. I do think that, just banning it all right, or just saying, it's too offensive, maybe even ban the whole Boondocks series based on this episode is bad because part of history and media history is politically incorrect humor. And I think one of the bad things that happen sometimes is that you just delete it from history, and then history ends up repeating itself. Like for example, like in the 1940s, there was a bunch of anti-Japanese films done by and anti-black films done by both the Disney company and the Looney Tune company. But it's important to show all that, and even Tom and Jerry, it was very, very racist. But it's important to show all that because if you're saying, you know what, it's too offensive, let's ban, let's forget it. There could be a time in the future where politically incorrect humor becomes popular again, and then racist and then the same like racist depiction in animation, not politically incorrect humor, can come back again, and that could be a very, very dangerous thing. So, you need to keep, history alive. But I also think that, it's important to say, you know what, free speech is allowed, even if it is people saying racist things, or even if it's people making politically incorrect humor, because it's still a voice that should be heard because it is a country of free speech. But I think that it's good to hear racist ideology in the sense that you can say it's wrong, or you can be like, man, I need to say so much against that. And it's also good because sometimes, it's good when these things are out in the public because it's safer when things are out in the public instead of things just being kind of quiet and other things like that. So, for example, like the riot in the Capitol building, a lot of that really started with the tiki torches and all that stuff like that too. So obviously, sometimes when people speak and that there's a problem, it doesn't surprise you when people rise and cause chaos. So it's always sometimes important to allow people to have an ear so you can kind of see the danger coming, or you can challenge people, and you can also just hope for people to change their ideologies. I do think it's unfortunate Jimmy Rebel passed away, and he didn't have time to realize he was so wrong about his racist beliefs. I do think that there are people like Uncle Ruckus in this world and other people who are racist against their own race, which I think is great that the Boondocks shows that, because that's true. There are black people who are racist against black people, but also there are people who are racist against other races and not the race that that they identify or are born as. But I would kind of say that that's it's good that they show that, because that is true to our reality, and it shows that those things exist. Now, I do think that the bad thing about Uncle Ruckus's character is that he doesn't show a chance of changing, or saying, okay, well, it's kind of revealed that the reason why he's racist is because his mother taught him a lot of racist ideology, and also his father was a black man that abused him. So I think that if he learned to process his past and realize that maybe his mother is wrong, not maybe, but is wrong, and maybe, and also understanding that his father being abusive was wrong, but it shouldn't be a hatred towards black people or whatever. I think it would be good if he kind of learns to overcome his racism, and you make that a fourth season, or even like the closure of the fourth season, Uncle Ruckus overcoming his racism, encouraging people to just, be themselves and not look at the world as, a race superior than another race. Because just remember with Granddad, he is a racist, and with Granddad, the reason why he moved to Woodcrest, the mostly white neighborhood, is because he knows that identifying with whiteness is a standard. But if they kind of ended the series with Uncle Ruckus not being racist, and maybe Granddad's like, you know what, I moved here because I wanted to be around white people to prove that I'm great, and I don't think that, and this place has been nothing but problems, we're going to move back to, where we came from, and we're going to move back to Chicago and just be happy, because I know like we're all happy there. This was before we had problems. I think that that would be a good ending to the series versus what they had. So, I do think that, one problem with like later seasons of the Boondocks, and as I said, is that you lose the character development, and you have like this episode that is that can be so interpreted as Flanderization, and but I don't see Flanderization because Uncle Ruckus is already over the top, but it definitely is done in a Flanderization type of way. And I think that's kind of bad. They don't have an opportunity where they show Uncle Ruckus actually changing to be a better person or overcoming his racism. Or even if they made a Boondocks movie, it should be about Uncle Ruckus having a lot of racist beliefs and making it comical, and then maybe he has a tragic origin, gets the audience emotional, and then he learns not to be that way. I think that would have been a good Boondocks movie. So I think that there's a lot of like things in this episode I think that were just done basically for free speech, and then just taking the Uncle Ruckus character to the most extreme that it can, because they knew that the series was not going to be a long-term thing. So why not just go out with a bang? This is Uncle Ruckus is going out with a bang with this type of episode. But I do think it's kind of unfortunate, just like with Riley's character, that you don't see a happy ending with Uncle Ruckus. He remains the same, and he's just ignorant, even though there is something in him that I'm very sure that he can change if he wants to, and it would have been a great ending if they had that, or they led up to something like that, versus an episode like this where it's more about how racist and funny we can make this entire episode. So it's definitely a controversial one. I do appreciate the comedy, but I do think that it's very clear and very tragic that the character development, or even trying to change a character to create a bigger, deeper, greater message, is not something that they did in later seasons, and it's clear that's not in this episode.